So today we're going to talk about finances, retirement, and successful aging. When we think about work in later adulthood, often this goes kind of in contrast to the stereotype where what we actually find is that productivity is the rule, not the exception. By 2015, 20% of workers in the US were over 55. So there's lots of workers in later adulthood. And there are a number of strategies to maintain or enhance performance despite cognitive declines. Older workers can use their years of expertise to maybe compensate for slowed motor skills. They have more commitment and less absenteeism than younger workers. On the flip side, though, they do have slower recovery from injuries. But one thing we often see is phased retirement for those who can't or don't want to retire completely. So over ages 59, workers can receive partial pension and still be permitted to earn their salary with reduced demands compared to full-time work. So this is kind of a nice happy medium where you get to keep the wisdom and expertise of older employees and reduce the cost of hiring and training new employees. Or sometimes employers will hire retired employees back as contractors so they can work part-time. So there's a number of factors that kind of go into the decisions of older adults to continue working or retire. One is social contact. So working gives them social status, friendship, prestige, and respect. Another is financial. So work, of course, provides incomes and benefits, including insurance and disability. There might also be personal reasons where work promotes higher self-esteem and life satisfaction and feelings of competence. As well as a sense of generativity where they're sharing their knowledge and teaching and mentoring younger generations. And often work is a core part of our identity, and so this is why we see older adults working later. But nonetheless, today's workers spend about 10 to 15 years of their lives in retirement. But we do see more older adults working past age 65 because they don't have enough money saved to retire. So, for example, in one study, in 1992, 80% of a sample had enough assets to retire. In 2002, only 67% did. We're also seeing different motives for not retiring. So a lot feel like they can't, or for retiring. So a lot feel like they can't keep up with the current workforce, so they decide to leave. Or they might retire because they feel like they've earned the right to relax or want to leave the job as soon as they can afford to. There are also those who are forced to retire because of poor health or accidents or disabilities, although these individuals tend to be less well off during retirement. And what we find is generally expectations for retirement plays a really important role in predicting well-being. But the best predictor of retirement age is being tired of working, so being sick of working, and also household wealth. So in terms of phases of retirement, we see older adults kind of go through a set of phases. So the remote phase, they kind of vaguely believe that they're going to enjoy kind of retiring at some point in the future, but they're not really preparing themselves and kind of deny that they're going to quit working. In the near phase, they're starting to do pre-retirement planning and thinking about transitioning from work to retirement. So looking at their benefits, kind of their pensions, things like that. And people who do this tend to be more active in retirement. Then they retire. Then there's the honeymoon phase where they're doing lots of things they didn't have time to do before, getting a lot of pleasure from leisure activity. This phase is generally negative if they're forced to retire, but those who choose to retire, it can be very positive. But eventually it kind of gives way, those exciting things give way to routine, and they get to disenchantment where they experience kind of letdown or periods of depression when they realize kind of their fantasies for retirement are unrealistic, and the loss of money and work roles and status kind of start to get to them. Then reorientation is when they start to realistically reason about how to cope. So they're kind of evaluating the type of lifestyle that will enhance life satisfaction during retirement. Then they get to stability, which is a set of they've set on the criteria that will involve the retirement phase, and then termination. So eventually retirement kind of loses significance in the eyes of the older person. So they're more dependent on others, and so it feels less independent. And because individuals retire at different ages, there's not necessarily a set age for these, but it really has to do with when they stop working. So there's no single lifestyle that predicts satisfaction in retirement, but satisfaction is really directly proportional to the number of activities that retirees participate in. When the activities are seen as useful, satisfaction increases. Busy ethic is the idea that the more similar your retirement is to your work, the greater satisfaction and the easier adjustment will be. So kind of this idea of needing to transfer work ethic to other activities. And volunteering is also important. So a huge number of older adults volunteer, and they get a lot of benefits from social interaction and civic participation. And what we find is those older adults who volunteer live longer and have better health. And this is really kind of a life course thing. So it's not just retired versus working, as we saw in the previous slide. There's a process over time and kind of a transition from being paid to unpaid work. Just to give an example, I have a neighbor who worked full-time in the schools, and rather than just retiring flat out, she went from working full-time to substitute teaching sometimes. Then she volunteered in the schools, and now she's still active and cares for her great-grandchildren. So she's kind of consistently been working, but the format that has taken has changed over time. In terms of finances, what we find is most workers are not prepared for retirement, and a large percent, as you can see from this figure, rely primarily on Social Security. But it does differ among classes. So in those in upper incomes get more money from their assets in their retirement or pensions. Middle income rely primarily on Social Security, then pensions and assets. And lower income generally is the same as the middle income, just less money from each. But there's increasing talk about issues with Social Security as well as with pensions, where aging populations means that there's more people pulling money out of the system than putting money into it. So there's concern about how long we can kind of maintain this system that we have. But those who are financially prepared for retirement tend to be retirees who have more financial knowledge, they have more emotional stability, more conscientiousness, and better perspective in terms of thinking about the future. And one of the reasons we see kind of issues in retirement planning is there's lots of things that make it difficult. So you don't know when retirees go in, they don't know how long they'll live. If you're thinking about it in the future, you don't necessarily know what your salary will be and for how long. You don't know how expensive retirement will be, what age you'll want to retire. You can't predict inflation, and you don't know how rapidly the interest on your assets will grow. So this is a link, and I have this on Moodle too, to start thinking about trying to plan your own retirement, but there are a number of challenges. Okay, so next we'll talk about housing. This is a graph just showing the challenges of affording housing in older adulthood, and what you can see is this is the percent of households spending 30% or more of their household income on housing. So many older adults, those who own or those who rent, are spending a large portion of their housing on, or of their income on housing. Often conditions of housing for older adults is problematic. So there's often exterior maintenance problems, which can lead to other kind of health problems, like if a heat system isn't maintained. And people who are most likely to live in deficient housing are those who are low income, who are renters, who are women living alone, or very elderly, or particularly elderly living in rural areas. And I do think you see that a lot around here, where older adults are living in their own homes, but they aren't necessarily maintained, which can be problematic. And so we have these issues of housing suitability, where there's not always a fit between the older individuals and the physical features of their home. So chronic health problems can lead to limitations in the ability to carry out functional activities like climbing stairs, bathing, and cooking, and this can be problematic. And neighborhoods can also create problems with access and proximity to services. Just to give you an example, I know an older couple where when they bought a house when they were younger, they had their kids, they raised their kids there, and when their kids were growing up, it was an up-and-coming neighborhood. Now they still live there, but a big interstate has been put in, basically right across from their house, and so the neighborhood that was once really nice is now kind of run down, low income, kind of sketchy neighborhood, but they have a hard time kind of parting with that because that's the house that they've always lived in. So a lot of older adults really want to stay in their own homes, even though sometimes it's not ideal. But sometimes if there's not too much disability, with modifications, it can be made to happen. So these kinds of modifications can help make it easier, safer to carry out daily activities, like moving from a tub to a sit-down shower. Another option is what are called accessory units, and so these are private housing units that are adjacent to single-family homes. So these can be things like a converted garage or other spaces that might kind of allow the elderly to either stay in their home and have someone stay near them, or move into a smaller living space near their family, which might be more ideal than moving into other options. Another option, though, especially for physically and mentally frail residents, is assisted living. And so this is nice in that it doesn't necessarily provide too much regulation or an institutional environment. And it's a nice alternative to a high-cost nursing home. So these are kind of apartments where they provide cleaning services and emergency services, and they might even have kind of a dining hall, but older adults still have a lot of autonomy and privacy and control. And you've got a really great video on kind of successful aging in older adults, so I won't talk a lot about that. But just in terms of individual predictors of quality of life, there's a couple of things that we know are really associated with it. Health and high socioeconomic status are huge predictors of higher quality of life. Women tend to have a higher quality of life under 65, but men have higher quality of life afterward. Those who are married have more positive life satisfaction. And also people who do more things have a higher quality of life. So adults who have kind of multiple social roles tend to be happier. And so that's the end of this lecture.